Hello and welcome to Union Soldiers Dressed in Gray. My name is John Miller. I'm the Executive Director here at the Shippensburg Historical Society. Today we're going to talk a little bit about the role that the New York State National Guard had in 1863 during the Confederate invasion that led up to the Battle of Gettysburg. You see, on June 15th, a massive Confederate army was beginning preparations to invade Maryland and Pennsylvania. In fact, the first units of cavalry forded the Potomac River at Williamsport, Maryland, and by that evening had occupied Chambersburg, where they began destroying some of the tracks and the rail yards around Scotland. The New York State National Guard was mobilized a day later to put down and help defend this valley in Pennsylvania from the Confederate invaders. 15,000 New York troops assembled, many of them dressed in gray uniforms, others in blue uniforms. They began boarding the trains heading to Philadelphia. From there, some of the troops would go to Baltimore, Maryland, where they were welcomed very warmly. Others would be dispatched to Harrisburg, where they received a very cool reception. The 8th New York, as well as the 71st New York, were ordered upon trains from Harrisburg and make their way here to Shippensburg. And on the morning of June 21st, they went ahead and deboarded those trains and marched directly to Scottsdale to fix the railroad properties that were destroyed by the Confederate cavalry. Half of the units went into Chambersburg, where they were greeted warmly by the citizens there. Tables with all kinds of different edibles lined the city streets. But soon happiness turned to anger when fist fighting and rioting began to break out. And those New York troops were moved about 2 miles south of Chambersburg, guarding the main pike. On June 22nd, Boyd's 1st New York Lincoln Cavalry was in Greencastle. There they skirmished with the advanced units of Confederate cavalry. And the end result of that skirmish, the first Union soldier to be killed on Northern soil occurs. Boyd's cavalry retreats back toward Chambersburg, where the 2 regiments of the New York State National Guard were ordered to be at the ready. Then orders to fall back came, and for some reason those orders were mistaken, and a full-fledged retreat took place through the streets of Chambersburg. Many of the men managed to make their way back to Scotland, where they boarded the trains that took them up to Carlisle. Others were not so fortunate. They would have to march back towards Shippensburg in order to get aboard the train cars. Company A of the 8th New York State National Guard was dispatched to give support to the Lincoln Cavalry, and by June 23rd, the streets here in Shippensburg became part of a small battlefield. The skirmish of Shippensburg broke out. Now, these troops may seem like they're cowardly, running and not engaging the enemy, but their job basically was not to engage, but to delay the arrival of the Confederate Army as the defenses of Harrisburg were going underway. Meanwhile, back in Harrisburg, more and more troops began arriving from New York, and they began taking up positions at the various fortifications surrounding the city and the Susquehanna River. Many of them would begin throwing up earthworks. Some of them would be dispatched where they would fight in some of the most northern part of the battles in Pennsylvania, just outside of Harrisburg. By July 1st, the target was no longer Harrisburg, and those troops there in Harrisburg as well as in Baltimore could breathe easier as the Battle of Gettysburg is unfolding. By July 4th, the New York State National Guard in Harrisburg was dispatched and ordered to Carlisle. From there, they would cut through South Mountain via Mount Holly Springs up to Pine Grove. There, the weather turned nasty. Torrential rainfalls came in. Creeks turned into rivers, and rivers turned into flooded zones. And from there, these troops basically staggered up the mountain. By the time they reached Cashtown Gap on July 6th, 7th, they were ordered to the Gettysburg battlefield by General George Meade. Then he counter-commanded that order and said that those troops should march directly into Waynesboro. So on July 8th, these New York State National Guardsmen, after passing through Fayetteville to Mont Alto on the 7th, and Mont Alto to Waynesboro on July 8th, finally arrived in Waynesboro. But then they were ordered about a mile south of town, right along the banks of the Antietam Creek. From there, they would wait for resupplies. They have basically gone through all their rations since July 4th, and many of them were in need of new shoes, as well as other supplies. Soon the orders arrived on July 11th and the 12th. They would start marching for Boonesboro, Maryland, where they would go ahead and meet up with the Army of the Potomac. From there, they marched again through more rainstorms and poor conditions. By the time that they reached Boonesboro, many of these men from New York, which are not veteran soldiers, they're only basically militia in a sense, were not treated very well by the Union veterans. Several veterans made fun of the color of the uniforms. Others said that these white strappings that other New York regiments wore presented a perfect X on the chest for an enemy sharpshooter. Shortly after their arrival in pursuit of the Confederate Army, the governor of New York was forced to recall many of the New York State National troops to make their way back to New York because of the rioting going on in New York City. From there, the famous 7th, followed by the 8th and the 71st, would be the first ones aboard the trains for Baltimore, and from there back to Philadelphia, and then into New York to put the riots down. For not being professional soldiers, these guys did quite a lot. Number one, they defended the valley from the Confederates. They bought time that was needed for the defenses of Harrisburg to be built. Finally, not being professional soldiers, but during the 30 days that they were in Maryland and Pennsylvania, many of these regiments marched more than 200 miles. That's quite impressive. So now that we talked a little bit about the history, before I do any of the up-close visuals with the camera, I just wanted to go ahead and showcase how the equipment was actually worn by a New York soldier. Like I said, many of the soldiers that arrived here in Pennsylvania as well as in Maryland wore gray cladded uniforms very similar to what I'm wearing, just only the differences would be in the trim. Others wore blue uniforms that resembled that of a U.S. Or a normal Union soldier. And others wore a combination of kind of like a dark gray with red trimmings as well, such as the 22nd New York. As you can see, I pretty much have the same type of equipment that any soldier, whether he be a Union or Confederate, would have, from the belt to the bayonet, scabbard and bayonet, to my cat pouch cartridge box. I also have a haversack for 3 days rations as well as a canteen. The only thing that's a little different is this hard pack that I have on my back. Many of the New York troops, when they left, this is pretty much the full fatigue uniform that was ordered for them to wear once they arrived here in Pennsylvania. So now let's go ahead and take a closer look at some of the details as well as some of the uniforms that I have as examples of what were worn. So as I said, many of these New York State National Guardsmen, when they were ordered to Pennsylvania and Maryland, many of them were wearing their gray fatigue uniforms that consisted of trousers and a shell jacket along with a cappy. My uniform here closely represents a soldier from the 8th New York State National Guard. Gray material as well as the black trim, as well as black trim up here, epaulets. And then one interesting aspect is a loop on the back side of the jacket for your belt. That way it would spin right here. So this is one example of how a New York soldier appeared here in Pennsylvania, especially here in Shippensburg. With a quick change of jackets, my impression now, as you can see, is a little bit different than that of the 8th New York. I'm portraying a person or a soldier from either the 13th or the 21st New York State National Guard, as their jackets and uniforms were pretty much the same. The 21st New York State National Guard, when they arrived in Pennsylvania, they pretty much took up the same positions where the 8th New York was encamped at along Camp Curtin. From there, they would do various fatigue duties, such as digging ditches for fortifications. Then all of a sudden, they got the orders to fall in and begin marching. Several of the men, realizing that their uniform color was basically the same as that of their opponent or their enemy, some of them went ahead and took some cloth or wool that was white colored and they would put a cross upon the chest of their jackets. That way, as they're fighting the enemy, there would be no confusion within their ranks as to who the enemy was from the regiment that they belonged with. So let's take a closer look at the uniforms that some of these men were wearing when they were here in Pennsylvania. So here we have your basic kepi, French influence, with black striping as well as a black band on it. And of course we have a brass numbering here, which could be for 8th Regiment, or it could mean also 8th Company. Moving over, here is my interpretation of what the 8th New York State National Guard was issued when they arrived here in Pennsylvania. It's a 4-piece body, 2-piece sleeve, very similar to military shell jackets that were being issued out at the time. As you can see, we have some black here, trim on the cuff. We also have epaulets, as well as black up here on the collar. And of course, we would have smaller buttons here and here, as well as 2 buttons right here and right here. This jacket here has been through quite a lot of different demonstrations. One of the interesting features with one of the surviving examples I've seen of this jacket here is the fact that it has one belt loop here in the back. And this is where your belt would go through, and this basically helps to hold the weight of your belt. Here's a quick interior view of this. And of course, a lot of these New York State regiments, when they were accepted into the New York State National Guard, or when they were accepted into the militia before they changed their name, many of them would have to pay to have a tailor personally make their uniforms. So this jacket here is a reflection of somebody who may not have a whole lot of money to have some of the most fanciest part of the uniforms. And I'll show you what I mean with that here in a second. So let's move on to another common style jacket here. And this one here could either be for the 13th, it could be for the 21st. There's a lot of regiments that have these scalloped decorations on their cuffs. And as you can see, we also have not one, but 2 belts here. And then we also have epaulets trimmed in black, but if you notice now, instead of it being full collar, this here is just basically taped out in black. Now, as compared to the other jacket, when you were accepted into service, you had to basically provide for your own. And for the 21st New York State National Guard, these guys were a little more up there on the ladder as far as like the social status, because of the fact that some of their members originated from Brooklyn. So this one here, actually, I went ahead and did an upgrade, and I've seen this in originals before. Here, I have a little bit of cotton batting here for comfort, and that's why you see these sewing machine kind of give it that quilting. And then up here to protect the collar itself, I have basically a front runner of what's called a neck binder, or just basically it protects the collar. And also it would enclose at the chin here with a simple hook and eye. Now, the 21st New York State National Guard was one of the units that I heard the story where they took white fabric and basically put some type of a cross on their chests. That way their own men would not mistake these guys as being the enemy. Again, the body is still the same. It's a 4-piece body, 2-piece sleeve. And then here we have the trousers. Again, you have the black trim. And of course, the shoes. And these are your basic brogan that pretty much every Civil War soldier would have worn at one point or another. So what type of equipment would have been issued to the New York State National Guard? Many of the troops before they left New York had already received orders for their fatigue uniform as well as a knapsack. Others would have to wait until they arrived here in Pennsylvania in order to get their uniforms and blankets and other equipment drawn from the quartermaster located within the walls of Camp Curtin. Here we have an example of what they would call a militia pack or hard pack. Basically, it's a wooden frame with painted cloth surrounding it. As you can see, I have a blanket at the top. Opening it up to the main compartment, I have my rubber blanket. This would be used in case of foul weather or for me to sleep on a damp ground. Opening it up, as you can see, I have spare clothing from a spare shirt, socks, and underdrawers. Now you can see how the internal of this knapsack here is actually constructed, hardwood. And this is kind of uncomfortable to wear on the wearer's back as compared to the Union soldier's knapsack, which has a tendency to be much softer. Moving on over here, we have a wallet, a thing of matches to start a campfire with or to light a pipe or a cigar. Here we have a housewife with needles, we got patches, anything to mend the uniforms. We got extra thread here as well as scissors. We have a deck of cards to help fight boredom in the camp. Toothpaste or tooth powder as well as a toothbrush. Straight razor and a camp mirror. A washcloth. And this comes in handy a lot of times, besides using it for bathing purposes, but you can use this to kind of clean up surfaces, but also if you're at a campfire and you need to remove something hot, you can put that down. Here we have a haversack. This is what would contain 3 days worth of rations. Food could be anywhere from salt pork to hardtack, coffee beans to sugar. Here we have poke bags that have all kinds of different foods in them. So we have some dried vegetables in this. We have coffee beans in this. A tin plate as well as eating utensils. We have a knife, fork, and a spoon. A tin cup, as well as a small coffee pot. This is perfect for doing about 2 cups of coffee. Here we have our canteen, holds 2 quarts of water. Here we have our cartridge box, and the SNY stands for the state of New York. And this is where 40 rounds of ammunition would be kept. So ammunition would be already prepackaged. We have the projectile as well as black powder. And they're all kept in what's called tins. So your unwrapped cartridges are up here. And then the cartridges that are still in the pack are right here. And then after that, you have a toolbox here for everything that you need to keep your musket in maintained order. Moving on over here, we have a cap pouch. This is what holds percussion caps. We have a belt, as well as our militia buckle here, and a bayonet, and the bayonet scabbard itself. And here's just a close-up of the example of a type of firearm that the New York State National Guard would have carried with them. This is an Enfield rifled musket. Obviously, Springfield rifled muskets would have been more popular.